Is this something that we're not really conscious of, that may be happening around us every day in the workplace, but we're so used to it happening that we don't stop and think that this is different and this is wrong and something needs to be done about it? Is there much of that operating in the workplace?
There are certain workplaces where people are inured to the idea that, well, you go to work and you do get poked and prodded. That the integrity of the person means nothing to either fellow workers or to your employer. Thankfully they're becoming less and less. It's the no touching rule, which I think now is more or less entrenched in schools. It does have limitations in that sometimes we talk about how it doesn't engender affection when natural affection can be expressed. But I think that that's an important part of the way that in public institutions we're saying that it is that any form of violence should not be allowed, and the mechanisms to ensure that doesn't take place should be there. So nobody can be under any illusions about the ambiguity of something, of an involuntary touching or going worse into an assault. In the workplace, I think it's really crucial that we have the capacity for those people who do believe it's acceptable for them to effectively see the error of their ways. Good policy is clearly crucial to that, but I think that it also needs to be engendered in other ways, such as in training courses, when young people, especially, are undertaking apprenticeships and traineeships. They need to have part of their education isn't just, how do you operate a lathe, how do you weld two bits of metal together, but it's also about, how do you operate with other human beings in the workplace and in the community, what is an acceptable way of working with them, and that we as a community say these are important and decent rules by which you should operate.
What sort of response have you had from workplaces with regard to those issues?
I could give my own personal experience. About 30 years ago, when I was a delegate in the workplace, there was a woman worker who was being harassed by a male, and when I saw that it was distressing her, I said to him, I don't think that's acceptable. He then threatened to knock my block off, which is the great Australian response to violence, I suppose. We now have a situation, though, I think, where harassment and bullying is just not seen as acceptable, and it's done. And if it is done, it's done furtively. I'm concerned about the legalisation in some respects. I mean, here I am talking about going to the federal court, but I am concerned about the legalisation of harassment and bullying and violence in the workplace. Oftentimes people will say, I can't raise that because there were no witnesses. Well, as if you need a witness to know that you've been harassed or bullied or subject to victimisation. You know if that's the case. The difficulty, of course, is that many organisations take that legalistic route. We need to make sure that the collective processes of workers through unions is something that enables those people to know that they've got support mechanisms, which in turn enable them then to turn around and say to or their representative, their workplace delegate or whatever, on their behalf to say, look, this is unacceptable behaviour. They don't need to have a witness to be able to say it, but that unfortunately is where a lot of people say, there's no witnesses, therefore I can't undertake any protective actions against myself. And that furtive nature of it these days, I think we need to address as well.
And can also be a culture of the workplace too, can't it?
Yes.
Which is, I guess, an even harder issue to address.
Yes, it is, especially if that culture, as I said before, is one where people are inured to the idea that the boss or a foreman or a fellow worker has, walks up to them and slaps them or pokes them or whatever. That sort of approach can be very difficult to break. And of course, thankfully we're getting back towards full employment here in Queensland, but in a situation where people are fearful for their livelihoods, especially if you don't have very many skills, those people who are subject to that culture or that behaviour often think that to step out of line invites dismissal. We again need to have stronger mechanisms and the capacity for people to join with others and say, no, this is unacceptable. is a crucial part of people protecting themselves and adopting protective behaviours.
I heard, if I can jump in, I heard a wonderful story lately. A woman told me that she was going from the transit or the car to her workplace, and she had to pass a construction site. This is in Ottawa, Canada. She was passing a construction site, and so as she passed, the different guys on the site, were whistling at her, calling out to her, saying things about her. And so she endured this for the whole length of this block. And at the very end, she had had enough, and there was one more guy there. So she stopped, and she just turned to him and said, when you guys were on strike, last year or 2 years ago, whenever this was, I supported you guys. Like I went by, I congratulated you, I said I was with you, I talked to other people. And now, here I am walking by, and you guys are harassing me. And I just want to tell you that. So she went on. So the next morning, she had to do this route again. She walks by, and as she's walking, all the guys on the site, they just stop and they just nod to her like this, and then just like that. And then she gets to the very end of the site, and the last guy standing there with a sign that says, "This is a harassment-free construction zone." So, it was a great story.
That's gorgeous. But again, that's not really physical violence, is it? Is that form of harassment, whether it's you walk into I was going to say newsroom, but the office, and there's a picture of Lara Bingle dressed in a little pink bikini on a motorbike. Is that sort of thing just, I wouldn't say as damaging, perhaps as physical violence, but how damaging is that? The wolf whistles and the girls on bikinis on motorbikes and things.
My own feeling on it is that when we think about most forms of physical violence, what we know is that unless it kills you, the physical wounds heal, but it's the emotional wounds which are the most long-lasting. And I think we tend to assume that, well, if it's just words, it's not as bad. Well, obviously on one level it's not as bad, but it can be so pernicious. I do a lot of training to end workplace harassment, and working with staff and managers, both to know the issues, but to figure out productive ways to deal with it. So it's not just all about, okay, we're going to take something to court or get someone fired or whatever, but how do you turn those moments into an educational moment so people can learn, so they can change, so they can grow. And what I hear over and over again from women and from men who experience harassment is it's shattering. I mean, you don't want to go to work. It's demoralizing. You live in fear of it. You start, it can compromise safety. It is, as you were talking about, Andrew, it is serious.
And it does do violence to a person's integrity, whether or not there's some physical interaction involved. You cannot say, good old Anglo-Australian sort of thing of, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Unfortunately, that's just simply wrong, because I think we're all aware that names can hurt, and that words do violence to people and do attack their integrity. It's not too much to say that in a workplace or in a community or wherever, where harassment and bullying or bending others to your will involuntarily is acceptable, that violence is never very far away, and it's always in a bullying situation. It's always implied anyway, and that violence may be done to your person, but it also may be done to your employment or to your family in other ways by making sure that if you don't bend to that other person's will or the organisation's will in some instances, that you've then got the capacity for people to lose their livelihoods, and it's just as devastating as being actually physically assaulted, and in some cases more devastating.
And especially too, I would imagine, Panha, if it was a male against a female, because then there are all sorts of sexual connotations in that kind of harassment as well, aren't there?
Sorry, I could not get your question.
Sorry?
Excuse me, your question again, please.
The question, I was just sort of trying to get your opinion really of, we were talking about in the workplace that maybe not physical violence, but words can do just as much damage sometimes and be just as threatening, and especially if they're coming from a male towards a female. Would you agree with that?
No, we consider like verbal abuse or harassment is also one of the violence. It's like it can affect you mentally. Like we also in our organization we also have the policy. If any kind of this behavior happen, we will not tolerate to that. Yeah. We will take action because we encourage people to respect one another. Yeah. It's not just about physical violence, but mentally violence is also harm people. And in our law, though law to protect women and not just women, men and women from in domestic, it's also considered like three: physical, mental, and also economic as a violence. Yeah.
What impact is the economy? Can you explain that one for us?
For example, a family, usually especially in the rural area, women depend a lot more to the husband who earn the money, and the money earned, they expect that women is the man like need to take care of the money and also need to save the money, and women does not have a decision making on how to use the money for the big stuff for home. Yeah. Women can spend for like food or school for the children. That's small amount, and at the same time, women need to be like considering saving as much as possible as well. Yeah.
So it's just a different form of control, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Michael, can you give us an example of how violence against women affects the whole community? How does it ripple through society, and what effect does it have on the community?
Well, perhaps the greatest way is the impact on children. All the research tells us very clearly that when children witness violence against those they love, when they, and it'd be, more often against their mom than their dad, but it could be either way, the impact on the children, particularly when they're young, is as if it's happening against them. And we know now from the research that that these early traumas of witnessing violence affects the development of kids' brains. Because what's happening is that there's a huge release of hormones such as cortisol, which actually impede brain development. So kids who are abused or experience as witness high levels of violence, their brain literally doesn't develop as well. So they're carrying with them, enormous hurt, rage, fear. And that just from the start, talk about an impact on the community. If children in whatever we might guess, 1 in 10 households in Australia are being exposed to that, that in itself has a huge impact on the community. You referred at the beginning to the economic costs. I mean, as a taxpayer, I can think of better things to do with billions of dollars a year. I think there's so many different levels. I mean, just the fact that women have to think about, their mobility. Sometimes if I'm speaking to a group and there's some sort of people who are skeptical about sort of women's safety, I'll just ask, could every woman here who's ever sort of thought twice about going out at night to the library, or to take a course at night, or to go to the corner store, whatever you're calling it, the store to get milk. If you've ever thought twice about doing it, if you've ever thought twice if you're going on a first date to tell a friend who you're going out with, could all those women stand up? Of course, all the women will stand up. Then I'll ask the men the same thing, and men don't have to think about those things. So if we restrict women's mobility, if we restrict women's safety, whether in the home or on the streets, that has a huge impact on the community.